Israel's bombardment of Gaza from the land, air, and sea continued today, much of it in the southern part of the territory, in the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. At least 163 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the last 24 hours, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Some of the worst shelling hit the western side of Khan Yunis, which was designated in the early stages of Israel's assault on Gaza as a so-called safe zone by Israel. There's also been intense Israeli bombardment in the vicinity of Nasser Hospital, the main hospital in the city, and tanks and armored vehicles are on the main road leading to the area. Among the places hit in Khan Yunis was a school sheltering displaced Palestinians. An eyewitness described the attack.
We saw death with all colors. The tanks entered. We saw everything vividly. It was horrible. Random shelling, random fire, random killing. They are coming just to kill and go back home. This is a Nakba. They are just coming to kill children, women, elderly, in the bathroom, in the school, in the hospital, in the street, anywhere. They killed us. They are just coming to kill only. Just that, just killing.
The interruption of communications and internet services in Gaza for days has continued for the fifth consecutive day, the longest telecommunications blackout of the war so far. This has caused delays for emergency workers to respond to airstrikes and has hampered media coverage from Palestinian journalists in Gaza. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera's bureau chief, Wael al-Dahdouh, left Gaza on Tuesday, crossing into Egypt and flying to Qatar to receive medical treatment. Dahdouh has come to symbolize both the suffering and resilience of Palestinian journalists in Gaza. In October, 4 members of his family were killed, including his wife, his 15-year-old son, his 7-year-old daughter, and his grandson, in an Israeli strike on a refugee camp where they were seeking shelter after their home was bombed. Last week, his eldest son, 27-year-old Hamza, also a journalist, was killed, along with another journalist in an Israeli airstrike on their car in Khan Yunis. Dahdouh will receive medical treatment in Doha for a wound he received when Israel bombed the area he was in that ended up killing his cameraperson, Samer Abudaqa. By some counts, over 110 journalists have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. The Committee to Protect Journalists has found more journalists have been killed in the first 10 weeks of Israel's war on Gaza than have ever been killed in a single country over an entire year. For more, we're joined by 2 guests. Sharif Abdel Kouddous is an independent journalist and a Democracy Now! Correspondent. His latest piece for The Intercept investigates the killing of Abudaqa. It's headlined, "Israel bombed an Al Jazeera cameraman and blocked evacuation efforts as he bled to death." He's joining us from here in New York. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Sherif Mansour, the Middle East and North Africa program coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Before we talk to Sherif about the cameraman, the Al Jazeera cameraman who bled to death over 5 hours, can we put this in a broader context, Sherif Mansour? Talk about the astounding number, the horrific number of journalists who have died in Gaza.
Well, thank you for having me again, Amy. I've already talked to you about this at least twice, and the number only goes higher. The deadly pattern we discussed become more deadly. And we have since talked about the apparent pattern of targeting against journalists, their families, and specifically when we discuss Al Jazeera and al-Dahdouh's family, they really are rewriting what it means to be a journalist today with immense, brave, and never seen before sacrifices. The Palestinian journalists, local journalists, so far, 76 out of 83 we've counted since the start of the war are Palestinians. The overwhelming majority are killed by the Israeli army. The Israeli army has killed more journalists in the span of those 3 months than any other entity or army have done over a course of 1 year since 1992. This is the most dangerous and we've never seen any assignment like this before. Of course, we called on as independent and transparent and thorough investigation. We want to see the case of al-Dahdouh, his son, Jazeera, and others that show culpability of the Israeli army to be put to public scrutiny by allowing immediate entry to international media and international investigators into Gaza without censorship by the Israeli army. The killing must stop, and for that to happen, the record must be made public, and U.S., European, and other allies of Israel need to call Israel on that record and ensure those investigations are made immediately public.
And Sherif Mansour, what has been the response of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces given the enormous number of journalists killed? Have they accepted any culpability at all for any of these killings?
The cases of precise attacks by drones against Al Jazeera, which happened at least twice in the last 4 weeks, included for the first time the Israeli army taking responsibility of doing those attacks, but also doing as they done in the past when they are held responsible, because the case of a journalist is someone who was behind an international news organization. They said they will investigate, but they also push false narratives, claims that they are terrorists or that they were part of an ongoing crossfire. And as we've seen in past incidents before this war, this time around, 3 narratives pushed by the Israeli army, correcting and changing and providing nothing more than a questionable document with English for the first time, coming from what they said was a terrorist group, but providing no other evidence that support their claim, and have so far the outlets, eyewitnesses, and the families of the journalists have denied the Israeli army narratives and showed to the contrary that, for example, Hamza, an Al Jazeera journalist, was approved to travel before his father, Wael did yesterday, after Israel vetted him. And if he was wanted by any chance, he wouldn't have had this approval before he was killed. And all our testimonial accounts that we and others are showing the contradicting nature of these narratives. This is also the same narrative we said happened before this war started in our deadly pattern report. And it is a pattern of responses designed to evade responsibilities by throwing the word terrorists, by also pushing out those narratives until the world look away.
And Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are both calling for Israel to be officially investigated for war crimes and its targeting of journalists, not only in Gaza, but outside of Gaza, because an internal Reuters investigation found that one of its journalists, Samer Abudaqa, was killed by an Israeli tank shell fired on him and a group of 6 other journalists in southern Lebanon on October 13th. Could you talk about these attacks outside of Gaza?
So we saw the same pattern of disregard for press insignia that we reported before this war. 13 out of 20 journalists killed by IDF fire over 21 years who wore press signs and press insignia showing that they are media personnel. And like those cases, the case of Samer Abudaqa show with independent investigation, physical proof, forensic proof from the scene, in addition to mapping, audio and visual analysis by international human rights groups and international media organizations that show that those journalists did not pose any threat to Israeli government positions, that they have been seen by an Israeli drone at least an hour, that they were visibly expressing or showing press signs and on laser cameras, and the position that they have taken was a high vintage hill that did not obscure their location with being close to any camera or house that justify that they would have any threat. And all of these and other evidence have shown that what we show in the past, in the cases of at least 3 journalists that we categorized as murder before this course, including Sherif Abudaqa and Yasser Murtaja and Mahmoud Abu Hussein, who were killed in Gaza, that there was no justification for the use of lethal force by the Israeli army. And those and other cases that we call for independent investigation as war crimes, because the Israeli army did not live up to their commitments and obligation under international law.
And, of course, Sherif Abudaqa was killed May 11, 2022, outside the Jenin refugee camp. Sharif Abdel Kouddous did a George Polk Award-winning documentary on the killing of Sherif Abudaqa. He's joining us as well. But, Sharif, I wanted to ask you about this latest piece you did for the Intercept that's headlined, "Israel bombed an Al Jazeera cameraman and blocked evacuation efforts as he bled to death." Give us the tick-tock, the chronology on what happened on that horrific day when he and Wael al-Dahdouh, who is the Gaza bureau chief for Al Jazeera, went to the school that was bombed. Tell us exactly what happened.
Right, Amy, and when we talk about the killing of Palestinian journalists in Gaza, this was an incident on December 15th where much of the world watched as hours ticked by as Samer Abudaqa was wounded and prevented from getting medical care by Israel and eventually died. And so that timeline of what happened, I think, is extremely important. But basically, Wael al-Dahdouh, who is Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Gaza, went with Samer Abudaqa, who's a 20-year veteran journalist, a cameraman. They went to this school in Khan Yunis, which had been bombed earlier in the day, and they were accompanied by a team of civil defense workers. That team had requested and received approval by the Israeli military through the Red Cross to be in the area. They got there around noon. They spent about 2.5 hours in the area. This is according to Wael al-Dahdouh. And as they were wrapping up their coverage, he said there were hardly anyone in the area. There were drones buzzing overhead. They were just about to leave and go back to the ambulance that had brought them there when a strike hit them at about 2:30 p.m. Wael al-Dahdouh was thrown to the ground. He said when he got up and kind of regained awareness, he realized he was bleeding quite profusely from his arm and that he would bleed to death if he didn't get medical attention. He looked over and saw the 3 civil defense workers who were accompanying them had been killed instantly. And then at a small distance away, he saw his colleague, Samer Abudaqa, on the ground. He had been wounded in the lower part of his body. Wael said that he seemed like he was screaming. Wael at that point had lost much of his hearing from the blast, and that Samer couldn't get up. Wael realized the only chance that both of them had was for him to get to medical attention and get help to bring Samer out, because he couldn't get up. So Wael somehow stumbled across about 800 meters to the ambulance that was waiting. He begged them to go in and get Samer, but they insisted on evacuating him first to a hospital in Khan Yunis, and that another ambulance would go retrieve him. There are videos of Wael al-Dahdouh receiving treatment, wincing in pain, calling on people to go get Samer, telling them to coordinate with the Red Cross. What we understand from Wael and others is that an ambulance did go immediately to try and retrieve Samer from the area, but that they were fired on or in their area, in their proximity, by Israeli forces. At the same time, Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Ramallah, Walid al-Omari, was making calls to the Red Cross. This is around 3:30 p.m. and asking the Red Cross to liaise with the Israeli military to allow 4 emergency crews to reach Samer Abudaqa and Khan Yunis. So the Israeli military knew at least by 3 or 3:30 that there was a wounded journalist who lay helpless that needed evacuation. And at the same time, news was spreading of Samer Abudaqa's plight, and there's a group called the Foreign Press Association, which is a Jerusalem-based nonprofit representing reporters, mostly foreign reporters from over 30 countries. And there's a WhatsApp group which has about 140 of these journalists on it. One of the journalists, a freelance reporter and producer based in Jerusalem named Orly Halpern, posted just after 3 p.m. About Samer's plight and told the journalists, or called on them, to call Israeli military spokespeople and to demand that Samer be evacuated. And so the FPA was getting involved. Senior members of the FPA, the Foreign Press Association, were getting involved, calling Israeli military officials, Israeli military spokespeople, senior ones, repeatedly asking for passage for Samer. And from what we understand, at the Intercept, we obtained screenshots of this WhatsApp group from multiple journalists in the group, and also from speaking with people involved in these efforts, that for hours, Israel did not give approval to these ambulances. Finally, after about 5 hours after Samer was initially wounded, a bulldozer was finally approved to go through to reach Samer, but by then he had already died. He had bled out. He was found with, he seemed to have removed his flak jacket and had tried to crawl and had died. And it was incredibly tragic. He had lain there. Al Jazeera had posted a live counter of the hours and minutes since he was wounded on its broadcast, and people were just watching, and he eventually died. And the next day, Jazeera announced it was preparing a legal file to submit to the International Criminal Court over what it called the assassination of Samer Abudaqa, and so did Reporters Without Borders. Also included his killing in a filing with the ICC, war crimes against journalists killed in Gaza. So, you know, the world should be outraged about this killing, about all the killings that are happening to Palestinian journalists in Gaza.
So, Sharif, in this particular case, there is no doubt that the highest echelons of the Israeli Defense Forces were aware that this journalist was wounded and in need of medical attention.
Yes, we have multiple journalists who we have screenshots of a WhatsApp group where they're discussing having spoken to Israeli military spokespeople in those hours and saying no approval yet. Ambulance is not cleared. A bulldozer is not cleared yet. So this took hours. And, you know, the Israeli military must have known very early on what the situation is. They're the ones who had repeatedly bombed the area. They knew there was rubble in the streets. There's constant, near constant drone surveillance of Gaza. The Red Cross, we know, was liaising with the Israeli military to try and get approval. And yet they left, or they just didn't allow, by some accounts, firstly, ambulances were fired on that tried to reach Samer Abudaqa. They returned back. This is the Palestinian Red Crescent and Civil Defense. And they were waiting then for approval. They also asked for Red Cross teams to accompany them to the area as a form of protection. And all of this is happening while Samer Abudaqa is lying helpless. The Israeli military is not giving permission, and he eventually died.
And then again, that was Wael al-Dahdouh's camera person and dear colleague, who bleeds to death over 5 hours. And then, in the last weeks, his son, Hamza al-Dahdouh, also an Al Jazeera journalist, is killed in this Israeli airstrike, along with the AFP stringer, Mustafa Thoraya, in an airstrike, a drone strike on a car. Sharif, final comments.
Yeah, I think, look, in this country, the journalistic community should be outraged, should be vocal in their outrage at Israel's killing of their colleagues in Gaza, and we haven't seen that. And let me just end by saying, you know, in 2022, the Pulitzer Board awarded a special citation to journalists of Ukraine for their coverage of the Russian invasion and of the war. And the citation reads, quote, "Despite bombardment, abductions, occupation, and even deaths in their ranks, they have persisted in their effort to provide an accurate picture of a terrible reality," end quote. This is the case many times over for the journalists of Gaza, for the Palestinian journalists of Gaza. I doubt they will be receiving any such accolades, and that's where the problem lies.
Sharif Abdel Kouddous, independent journalist, wrote this piece for The Intercept. Israel bombed an Al Jazeera cameraman and blocked evacuation efforts as he bled to death. We'll link to it at The Intercept at democracynow.org. And Sherif Mansour, Committee to Protect Journalists, Middle East and North Africa Program Coordinator, speaking to us from D.C.